Hello and welcome. I'm back with another set of books this time, and this week our theme is going to be on tea. Yes, exactly. I'm talking about your favorite drink, tea, or some of you who live in India, they might call it chai. So I'll get to that. I will come to the Indian chai in the future episodes, but today, just to begin with, let's get familiarized with the idea of Teaism or the philosophy of tea. And to talk about that, I've got this wonderful short book with me. It's called The Book of Tea, written by a Japanese artist and writer, Okakura Kakuzo. This book is more than 100 years old, but when you read it, it feels really, really fresh. And you can easily find it online. You can easily download the PDF, or if you want to purchase the hard copy, you can get that too. I'll share the link in the description. So, anyway, talking about the book, it was written with the intention of having the Western readers in mind, those who were not familiar with the Asian cultures, particularly the Chinese and the Japanese cultures, and how tea evolved in those cultures. So that was the background in which the book was written. And what it does is, of course, it talks about the history, the evolution of tea, but more importantly, it talks about the idea of teaism. It's a kind of a tradition, or you may say a religion that evolved in the 14th and 15th century in Japan, and it became a kind of a way of life for the tea masters. So just like there were the different religious movements of Buddhism, Taoism, all those things, similarly, when teaism came around, you had tea masters, just like there were the Zen masters or Tao masters or the followers of Confucianism. So just like that, these were the people, they were following the tradition of tea making, and in that they were finding the meaning of life. And I think that's probably the first thing that's really difficult to comprehend for the Western readers, because for a lot of Westerners, the idea of religion, for that, the central idea has to be about the concept of God, the concept of scripture. But when you come to the East, you find that various religious traditions, God is not really the central point. A lot of times the central idea is to move towards the nirvana, the liberation, and in some cases God happens to be there, and in certain cases he's not there. So that's not really a foreign idea in the Asian cultures. And similarly, so just like there were the Buddhist ideas, the Tao ideas, Confucianists, the Zen masters, and so was the idea of teaism back then. So that's where the book begins, with the philosophy of teaism. And now let's talk about that. What was it? What was the idea of teaism? And I really liked it the way Kakuzo puts it in his book. He talks about how in religions, often we talk about the past, the future, what's going to be after death. Whereas in the idea of teaism, the fundamental philosophy was to make the present moment eternal. Just like the great art does. What it does is, it captures a particular moment, it keeps you there, and you feel like this moment is never going to end. Such is the beauty, such is the purity and harmony in it. And that's precisely the idea, just like the idea of beautiful art which you observe, and then in some ways you feel that you're transcending the reality. That's surreal, right? So similarly in teaism, through the art of making tea, through the art of drinking tea, you achieve that transcendence, you achieve that perfection. And that's really the core, the idea of this philosophy. And if these tea masters, they were going to practice this belief system or this tradition, of course, it brought a lot of responsibilities. They had to have that discipline in their lives so that they could regulate their daily lifestyles and bring that high standard of refinement. And that's what they tried to achieve. And I'm sure to some of you it might sound like a bit of fanaticism, a little bit of too much of obsession with this idea of tea, but that's how it was. That's how the spiritual seekers, they found their object. You can make a same case about the idea of God, that a lot of seekers, they find this idea of God and they strive towards it, and then they regulate their life in certain way that they're trying to get there. They're trying to achieve that perfection in the invisible. Here, in this case, just like a lot of idol worshippers do, they're trying to find that perfection here and now, right in front of their eyes, not in the invisible deity. So that's pretty much a norm in the Eastern traditions. And at the same time, for these tea masters, the idea of beauty, the idea of perfection was so important that they believed that if you want to understand the idea of beauty, you have to practice it. You have to become beautiful. You have to pursue that path. You have to bring that perfection in almost everything you do. Of course, it has to start somewhere. It has to start, in this case, with the act of making tea and then the way you drink it. But then slowly and surely, you bring that meditative aspect of it, the mindfulness of it, to everything that you do. And that's pretty much what you do in various spiritual practices, such as in case of mindfulness. You start with, let's say, one practice, let's say with the idea of breathing. And mindful breathing you practice, and then slowly you bring that practice of mindfulness in almost every other task that you do. And that's how it goes. So you can see the parallels here. It's pretty much the same thing that Buddhists do with mindfulness, or the Zen masters did in their lifestyles. And so did the tea masters. And they brought a number of changes in the society. They brought, in fact, they were responsible for a number of inventions and revolutions in terms of art and architecture. For example, the classical architecture and the interior decorations, those influences that they brought about when they were making their tea rooms, the way they were arranging them, because those were the sacred places for the followers of Teaism. So the kind of influences that they brought, they can still be seen in most of the Asian and the religious architecture that you see in East Asia, especially in the monasteries. And similarly, when they were working on the perfection, they were working on the art. And so that pottery that evolved during their period, and that is still popular today. So they had those influences in different schools of art, just like any other belief system. And once again, you might ask, all this effort, why they were doing this? And I think I'll come back to the original point that I made earlier, that they were trying to bring beauty and therefore happiness in the most simplest and the most ordinary moments of life. For them, making a cup of tea, it was a lesson in regulating their own existence. How you make this tea, how gently you go about it, how sincerely you do it, how mindfully you do it. Can you do it beautifully? Can you add beauty to it? And if you can do that, you can also make your entire life beautiful. And then, of course, he talks about the history and how the tea evolved. Along with it, the different traditions evolved, the tea room evolved, the architecture, the style, and the way of preparing tea, all that evolved over the course of time. And that is something that I will discuss with the help of another couple of books in the next episode. But for now, let's come back to the philosophy of it and how there's a connection between the Taoism, the Zen, and in the philosophy of tea or Teaism. So, first, Taoism, when we talk about it, the Tao literally means a path, or you can also call it the way. The way in this case, philosophically speaking, we're talking about the way of life. And the same can be said about its successor, which is Zennism, and that is also talking about, in a way, the way of life, although there's a distinction between the two. And that distinction is important because in Taoism, you find the elements of collectivism, whereas the Zennism, it brings that idea of individualism. It came from the Southern Chinese mind. So accordingly, when you see the art or the literature of these two different philosophies or different periods in which they were practiced, you find that distinction quite clearly. So to begin with Taoism, to understand Taoism, one thing that you need to first keep in mind is that the Taoist absolute was the relative. So what that did was the practical implications. For them, the Taoists, the idea was always in the idea of, let's say, moral ethics. That was always in the relative terms. Whatever was right or wrong, morally speaking, that was in the relative terms. It wasn't really fixed. It was changing. The universe is changing after all, and those are the Buddhist influences you can see there. But that had its consequences, and those theories, when they were practiced, they gave rise to different sort of art. So jiu-jitsu, for example, the Japanese art of self-defense, that was developed during that period. And you might know, some of you, that in jiu-jitsu what you do is you try to draw out and exhaust your enemy's strength by kind of non-resistance. You preserve your own strength. And that's the kind of principle behind it. That you allow yourself to flow freely like the water, and you understand that. You understand the changing nature of matter. But when you come to Zennism, which is the successor of it, and you will find certain similarities there because it also draws its inspiration from Taoism in some cases. By the way, the word Zen itself, it comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana, which literally means meditation. And in this case, you'll find that it gets more individualistic. It's like the individual is trying to attain nirvana, the transcendence, that element that you achieve through different forms of practice or meditations, that's centered around the individual. You may say that it was also there in Taoism, but of course it grew over time, and in Zennism it got stronger. But in the case of Taoism, the Tao masters, what they were trying to do, they were trying to create things, organize things in such a way that the spiritual liberation is achieved, that you find meaning there. What the Zen masters were doing, it was slightly different. They were recognizing the spiritual importance of the mundane or the ordinary things in life. They were not getting bogged down by the strong ideas of philosophy or let's say religious teachings. They were directly communicating with the universe, and that's pretty much they believed. So they were the seeker in this case, the seeker for perfection, for the ultimate spiritual realization. That person was trying to discover it in his own life and with the reflection of his own inner light. He wasn't seeking something else. And when you notice that and you see the clear relation, out of these ideas grew the idea of Teaism. Out of the mundane habits and seeking perfection in those habits, you find that another cult or tradition, you may say, that evolved, and that is now known as Teaism. Although it's not really as popular as it once was, it's not really followed as sincerely as it used to once upon a time. But it's really interesting to see how we can find meaning, as Teaism teaches us, in the simple aesthetic ideals, in the simple aspects of life. And that's what this book talks about in great detail. And as I said, I'll continue to talk about this idea and history and more details of tea, more interesting stories about tea in the next few episodes. So stay with me and I'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you.